Good evening. The account you're about to hear is not real. It is a work of fiction, and yet it may feel all too possible. There is no mist rolling across our towns, no monsters lurking beyond the veil. The voices you will hear are not those of living souls. They were created entirely through artificial intelligence. Any resemblance to persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. Listen closely now and step into the fog. Enjoy the show.
Good evening. I'm David Weeks with Channel 7 News. We begin tonight with unusual weather reports from across the Tri-County area. A thick fog bank has been observed moving slowly eastward through rural communities since early this morning. And while fog isn't uncommon this time of year, several local residents have called our newsroom with concerns about what they're describing as strange behavior among livestock and pets in affected areas. We now go live to Judy Barton, who is standing by in Millfield, where the fog is expected to arrive within the next few hours. Judy?
Thank you, David. I'm here on Route 9, just outside Millfield, and while the evening is clear where I'm standing, you can see that wall of fog in the distance stretching across the entire western horizon. It's unlike anything I've seen before. It appears to be moving as one solid mass, almost like a slow-moving storm front, but weather services report no precipitation or wind patterns that would explain this formation. I've spoken with several farmers in the area, and David, their reports are consistent and frankly quite puzzling. Bob Miller, who runs a dairy operation about 2 miles west of here, told me his cattle refused to graze in the western pastures this morning and have been huddled together near the barn since dawn. Even more unusual, Sarah Mills at the animal shelter says dogs and cats brought in today have been unusually agitated, pacing constantly and whining toward the west-facing windows. She's worked with animals for 15 years and says she's never seen behavior quite like this.
Judy, have you been able to get any official comment from the National Weather Service about this fog formation? And what's the timeline looking like for when it might reach more populated areas?
I did speak with meteorologist Janet Walsh at the regional office, and she admits they're somewhat baffled by the formation. Their satellite imagery shows the fog bank maintaining an unusually uniform density and moving at a steady rate of approximately 3 miles per hour, which she describes as inconsistent with normal atmospheric conditions. As for timing, if it maintains its current speed and direction, we're looking at the fog reaching Millfield proper sometime around midnight, with the possibility of it continuing east toward the county seat by early tomorrow morning. What's particularly striking, David, is the silence. I'm used to hearing crickets, night birds, the usual sounds of a rural evening. But as that fog has gotten closer, it's become remarkably quiet out here. Even the traffic on this normally busy highway has thinned out considerably in the past hour.
Certainly unusual circumstances, Judy. We'll continue monitoring this story throughout the evening and have weather updates every 20 minutes. In other news tonight, the City Council met to discuss proposed changes to the downtown development project, and we'll have those details when we return after this short break. For those in the affected areas, we encourage you to stay indoors tonight as a precaution and report any unusual observations to local authorities. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Channel 7 News. I'm David Weeks. We're continuing our coverage of the unusual fog phenomenon that has now engulfed several rural communities in our viewing area overnight. The fog reached Millfield just after midnight as predicted, and we've received numerous calls from residents reporting what they describe as an unusually thick, almost impenetrable mist that has made travel nearly impossible on rural roads. Emergency services are advising against any non-essential travel in affected areas until visibility improves. Let's go back to Judy Barton, who has been monitoring the situation from Route 9. Judy, what are conditions like now?
David, I have to tell you, in 20 years of field reporting, I've never experienced anything quite like this. The fog reached my location about 3 hours ago, and the visibility here has dropped to less than 10 feet in any direction. It's remarkably dense, almost like being inside a cloud. And what's particularly unsettling is how quiet it's become. You'd expect to hear cars trying to navigate the roads, maybe emergency vehicles, but there's been virtually no traffic since the fog settled in. I've been in contact with the Millfield Fire Department, and Chief Morrison tells me they've received several calls from residents who say their pets, dogs, cats, even birds, refuse to go outside and are hiding in basements or under furniture. One caller, Maria Santos, insisted her dog Max, who normally begs to go on walks, actually cowered and whimpered when she tried to take him out this morning. She's had Max for 8 years and says she's never seen him react to weather this way before. Back to you, David.
Certainly strange behavior patterns emerging, Judy. Now, to help us understand what might be causing these unusual conditions, we have Dr. John Ferguson joining us by phone. Dr. Ferguson is an atmospheric scientist at the Regional University and has been studying unusual weather phenomena for over 15 years. Dr. Ferguson, thank you for taking the time to speak with us this morning.
Thank you for having me, David. I've been reviewing the available data on this fog formation, and while it's certainly unusual, I want to assure your viewers that there are rational explanations for what we're seeing. What we appear to be dealing with is what meteorologists call a radiation fog combined with an unusual high-pressure system that's essentially trapping the moisture close to the ground. The density your reporter is describing is not unprecedented, though it is on the extreme end of what we typically observe. As for the animal behavior, animals are often more sensitive to barometric pressure changes than humans, and the pressure differential associated with this system could certainly explain why pets and livestock are acting agitated. Long consulted with colleagues at the National Weather Service, and while the formation is admittedly rare, we're confident this is a naturally occurring phenomenon that should dissipate as temperatures rise and wind patterns shift. I'd expect to see significant improvement in visibility within the next 12 to 18 hours. My advice to residents is simply to exercise normal caution when dealing with dense fog conditions. Stay indoors if possible, avoid unnecessary travel, and certainly don't let concerns about animal behavior create unnecessary panic.
Dr. Ferguson, that's reassuring to hear from a scientific perspective. Thank you for that analysis. We'll certainly be monitoring conditions throughout the day and hope to see that improvement you've predicted. Judy, are you planning to remain on location to document any changes?
Yes, David, I'll be staying here to observe how conditions develop. Though I have to say, Dr. Ferguson's explanation is certainly logical, but there's something about being inside this fog that feels different somehow. It's hard to describe scientifically, but there's an almost oppressive quality to it that goes beyond just reduced visibility. I'm hoping the doctor's timeline proves accurate and we see some clearing soon.
We appreciate your continued coverage, Judy, and please stay safe out there. We'll check back with you in our noon broadcast. Coming up after the break, we'll have your extended weather forecast and an update on the highway closure affecting the morning commute. This is Channel 7 News, and we will be back right after this.
Folks, what we're witnessing right now is not natural weather, and don't let these so-called experts fool you into thinking otherwise. This is a coordinated operation that's been decades in the making, and they're finally pulling the trigger. You think it's a coincidence that this fog just happens to appear out of nowhere, moving at a perfect 3 miles per hour like some kind of machine, while animals are going absolutely berserk and running for cover? Wake up, people! The government has been experimenting with weather modification since the 1940s. Project Storm Fury, HARP, cloud seeding operations. And now they're testing something bigger, something that makes Hurricane Katrina look like a summer shower. I've been tracking unusual military activity in the region for months. Black helicopters, unmarked vehicles, communications blackouts that the mainstream media conveniently ignores. And now suddenly we have this perfectly uniform fog bank that defies every law of meteorology. They want you to believe some university professor who's probably on their payroll telling you it's just barometric pressure making your dog hide under the bed. But let me tell you something. Animals can sense danger that humans have been conditioned to ignore. This is a test run, folks, a trial balloon for something much bigger. And while you're sitting there listening to Channel 7 telling you to stay indoors and wait for it to pass, they're gathering data on population compliance, response times, how effectively they can isolate entire communities without anyone asking the right questions. The silence your reporter mentioned, That's not natural atmospheric conditions. That's sound dampening technology, acoustic manipulation designed to disorient and control. They've been planning this for years, waiting for the right moment when people are distracted, when local authorities are understaffed, when weather patterns provide the perfect cover story, and now they're implementing phase one of what I guarantee you is a much larger operation designed to test their ability to quarantine and control entire populations. Then, don't be sheep walking into the slaughterhouse. Stock up on supplies, get your communications equipment ready, document everything you can, because when this fog lifts, if it lifts, nothing is going to be the same. And the only thing standing between you and complete government control is your willingness to see what's really happening here. They're counting on your compliance, your trust, and their so-called scientific explanations. Your belief that your government would never experiment on its own citizens, but history shows us otherwise. From MK Ultra to Tuskegee, and this fog operation is just the latest chapter in their playbook of population control and psychological warfare. The animals know. Trust the animals. Prepare for the worst. And whatever you do, don't believe a word they're telling you on the evening news, because the truth is far more terrifying than any weather phenomenon. And they know that once you see what's really inside that fog, there's no going back to the comfortable lies they've been feeding you your entire life.
Good evening. I'm David Weeks with Channel 7 News. It has now been 36 hours since the first reports of an unusual fog formation appeared in our region. Contrary to earlier predictions, the phenomenon has expanded, now stretching nearly 50 square miles and affecting at least 6 communities. State officials have declared a temporary no-travel zone around the fog with checkpoints and roadblocks at all major access points. Residents inside the affected area are being urged to remain indoors. Cell towers have gone dark and communication with people inside the zone is becoming increasingly unreliable. We've managed to maintain contact with our field correspondent, Judy Barton, who remains within the perimeter. But before we go to Judy, we're joined briefly by a local ham operator who has been relaying distress calls from within the zone. Harold Finch, what are you hearing?
Evening, David. My rig's been flooded with calls since last night. Mostly scratchy, broken transmissions. People say they're hearing strange sounds in the fog, like low humming or a kind of vibration that rattles windows. Some are reporting loud thuds against their homes, objects striking walls, but when they look, there's nothing there. A farmer told me his tools were scattered across the yard this morning, though he swore he'd locked them inside the shed. I can't confirm any of this, but it's consistent across multiple callers.
Thank you, Harold. Please keep that channel open. We'll return to you shortly. Now, Judy Barton is on the line from inside Millfield, where conditions appear to be worsening. Judy, what's happening where you are?
David, the situation has definitely escalated since yesterday. The fog hasn't lifted at all. In fact, it feels thicker, heavier. Visibility is only a few feet. Residents here are deeply unsettled, not just by the fog itself, but by the sounds coming from within it. Earlier today, I interviewed Michael Chen, a local contractor who had been working in a barn conversion when the fog rolled in. He told me he heard something moving outside the barn, so he threw a wrench into the fog. Seconds later, the wrench came back, bent nearly in half, as though something had caught it and hurled it back at him.
Judy, did you see this wrench yourself?
I did. It was badly warped, too much to have been thrown by human hands. Chen also had scratches on his arms, thin parallel lines, unlike any animal wounds I've seen. When I asked what caused them, he just shook his head and said, "Something touched me in the fog."
That's extremely disturbing. Have authorities offered any explanation for these reports?
Not directly. I spoke to officers at one of the state police checkpoints this morning. They told me residents should remain indoors and avoid provoking disturbances. When I pressed for details, one officer admitted off the record that they've received multiple unusual incident reports from inside the zone, but would not elaborate.
Judy, we're concerned for your safety. Are emergency services still active where you are?
That's one of the troubling parts, David. Residents here have told me they've dialed 911, some for medical emergencies, others because of noises outside their homes, but no units have arrived. As far as anyone here can tell, emergency responders have pulled back to the perimeter. Inside the fog, people are essentially on their own.
Thank you, Judy. Stay safe and keep that line open as long as possible. For our viewers, state officials stress that the containment measures are temporary, but the situation remains fluid. We'll continue to bring you updates as they come in. This is Channel 7 News.
All right, we're live here on Truth Frequency with your host, Carl Grimes. And folks, I got to tell you, what's happening in the Tri-County area right now is absolutely insane. We have this massive fog that's been sitting there for almost 2 days, emergency services pulling back, and reports coming out that sound like something straight out of a horror movie. I've got Dr. John Ferguson on the line. He's the atmospheric scientist who was on Channel 7 yesterday, basically telling everyone this was normal weather. But Doc, I got to ask you straight up, after everything that's happened in the last 36 hours, are you still standing by that assessment? Because what I'm hearing from people inside that fog zone sounds like anything but normal atmospheric conditions.
Carl, I appreciate you having me on, and I want to be clear about something. Science requires us to adjust our hypotheses when new data becomes available. What we're observing now does fall outside the parameters of typical meteorological phenomena. The persistence of the fog formation, the acoustic anomalies being reported, and particularly the interaction described by that contractor. These are elements that challenge conventional atmospheric science. I've been consulting with colleagues across the country, and we're finding very few comparable cases in the literature. The closest parallels involve temperature inversion layers in extreme topographical conditions, but even those don't account for the reported physical interactions or the apparent expansion of the affected area. I'm not ready to abandon scientific methodology, but I will acknowledge that we may be dealing with atmospheric conditions that are unprecedented in our region, possibly involving factors we don't yet fully understand.
Okay, so when you say factors we don't yet fully understand, what are we talking about here? Because I've got callers blowing up my phone saying they've got family trapped in there, people are hearing things that don't sound like weather, and now we've got someone claiming something in the fog caught a wrench and threw it back at him. That's crazy, right? But you're a scientist. What could possibly cause something like that?
The wrench incident is particularly puzzling because it suggests a level of physical interaction that atmospheric phenomena simply cannot produce. Fog, even extremely dense fog, is essentially suspended water droplets. It cannot catch objects or propel them with force. If we take that report at face value, we'd have to consider explanations that go beyond meteorology. There could be electromagnetic anomalies affecting the area. Certain types of electromagnetic fields can influence metallic objects in unexpected ways. There's also the possibility of localized air pressure variations, creating updrafts or downdrafts strong enough to redirect thrown objects, though the precision described would be highly unusual. Carl, I have to be honest with you, in 20 years of studying atmospheric science, I've never encountered anything that matches what's being reported from inside that fog zone.
Electromagnetic anomalies. Now that's interesting. So you're saying there could be some kind of electromagnetic field inside this fog? Because I've had people tell me their electronics are going haywire, their phones are cutting out, and that reporter mentioned her recording equipment is malfunctioning. That sounds like EM interference to me.
The electronic malfunctions are definitely consistent with electromagnetic interference, and that's actually one of the few elements of the situation that we can analyze with some confidence. Strong EM fields can absolutely disrupt cellular communications, cause audio equipment to produce unusual static patterns, and interfere with radio frequencies. What's concerning is the source of such a field. Natural EM anomalies typically occur during severe geomagnetic storms or in areas with specific mineral compositions, but the weather data shows no unusual solar activity, and the geological surveys of that region don't indicate any mineral deposits that would generate significant electromagnetic effects. If there is an EM component to this phenomenon, it would have to be artificial in origin, which raises questions about potential industrial activity or other sources of electromagnetic generation that I'm not qualified to speculate about.
Whoa, hold up. Did you just say artificial? So you're thinking this could be man-made? Because that contractor mentioned hearing sounds before he threw that wrench, and the reporter keeps talking about these organic noises coming from multiple directions. What kind of artificial source could create that kind of electromagnetic field and also produce sounds that people describe as breathing or growling?
Carl, I need to be very careful here because we're moving into territory where I could easily venture beyond my expertise. But yes, certain types of high-powered electromagnetic equipment could theoretically produce the interference patterns we're seeing. Military installations, research facilities, certain types of industrial equipment, these can generate significant EM fields. As for the acoustic phenomena, that's where things become really complicated. Sound propagation in dense fog follows predictable physical laws, but the descriptions we're hearing suggest sounds that seem to respond to human activity or move in patterns that don't match natural acoustic behavior. If we're dealing with artificial electromagnetic sources, it's possible there are also artificial acoustic sources, speakers, sound projection equipment, things designed to create disorientation or confusion. But Carl, the scale of such an operation would be enormous, and the question becomes why anyone would create such an elaborate setup in a rural area with minimal strategic value.
That's exactly what I'm thinking, Doc. This whole thing sounds like some kind of test or experiment. I mean, you've got this perfect geometric fog bank that moves at exactly 3 miles per hour, electronic interference, sounds that respond to people, and now something that can catch and throw objects with precision? That doesn't sound like nature to me. That sounds like technology. So you're telling me it's possible this whole thing is artificial?
I'm saying that the evidence we have is inconsistent with purely natural phenomena. And when natural explanations become insufficient, we have to consider alternative hypotheses. But Carl, if this is some form of technological demonstration or test, it would represent capabilities far beyond anything I'm aware of in current atmospheric manipulation research. Weather modification technology exists, cloud seeding, ionospheric heating facilities like HAARP, but nothing that could create a self-sustaining interactive environment like what's being described. If this is artificial, it would suggest technological capabilities that are either classified beyond public knowledge or represent a breakthrough in atmospheric science that hasn't been publicly documented. Either possibility is deeply troubling because it implies someone has the ability to essentially quarantine entire communities and create conditions that can physically interact with people in ways that seem to defy conventional physics.
This is absolutely mind-blowing, and honestly, Doc, it sounds like you're saying what a lot of people are thinking, but nobody wants to say out loud that this might be some kind of government or military operation. I've got to ask you directly, in your professional opinion, could this be a test of some kind of new technology?
Carl, I cannot and will not speculate about specific government activities, but I can tell you that the combination of effects we're seeing would require coordination between multiple advanced technologies, electromagnetic generation, atmospheric manipulation, acoustic projection, and possibly others we haven't identified yet. The precision and scale involved would require significant resources and expertise that would typically be associated with major research institutions or military applications. What troubles me most as a scientist is that if this is a controlled test, there appear to be no safety protocols in place for the civilian population inside the affected area. Legitimate scientific research involving human subjects requires extensive ethical oversight and safety measures, none of which seem to be present here. If this is indeed artificial, it represents either a massive failure of safety protocols or a deliberate decision to expose civilians to unknown risks, both of which are deeply concerning from an ethical standpoint.
Dr. Ferguson, this has been absolutely fascinating and terrifying. Any final thoughts for people who might have loved ones in that fog zone, or advice for folks who are wondering what the hell is really going on out there?
My advice is to document everything, maintain communication with people inside the affected area however possible, and demand answers from official sources. If this is natural, we need to understand it to prevent future occurrences. If this is artificial, then the public has a right to know what kind of capabilities exist and who has access to them. Most importantly, the safety of people inside that fog must be the primary concern, regardless of whether this is a natural phenomenon or something else entirely. The lack of emergency response and the apparent abandonment of civilians in the area is unacceptable under any circumstances, and that alone should be raising serious questions about what authorities actually know about this situation and why they're not sharing that information with the public.
Folks, you heard it here. One of the region's top atmospheric scientists basically just told us this fog situation is either impossible or artificial. And either way, people are in danger and nobody's telling us the truth. Dr. Ferguson, thank you for your honesty and for being willing to say what needs to be said. We'll be following this story closely, and I encourage everyone to stay informed and stay skeptical of whatever official explanations we get in the coming days. This is Carl Grimes on Truth Frequency. We'll be back after these messages with more analysis of what might be the most important story of our lifetime.
Good evening. I'm David Weeks with Channel 7 News. It's now been 3 full days since the fog phenomenon began affecting our region. And tonight we have what some officials are calling encouraging developments in understanding the situation. Dr. Margaret Stevens from the National Weather Service's Severe Weather Division held a press conference this afternoon presenting analysis that contradicts some of the more alarming reports we've been receiving from the affected area. Additionally, we're seeing the first organized evacuation efforts as state authorities have opened temporary shelters for residents choosing to leave the fog zone voluntarily. We begin tonight with Dr. Stevens' assessment, which offers a significantly different perspective on the events of the past 72 hours.
Thank you. After extensive analysis of satellite data, atmospheric readings, and consultation with meteorological experts from 3 major universities, we can now provide a more comprehensive explanation for the fog formation currently affecting the Tri-County region. What we're observing is an extremely rare but entirely natural phenomenon known as a persistent temperature inversion, combined with what's called a fog dam effect. The acoustic anomalies reported by residents are consistent with sound reflection and distortion that occurs when dense fog interacts with varying terrain elevations. The electronic interference is explained by natural electromagnetic fluctuations that can occur during prolonged high-pressure systems. Most importantly, the reports of physical interactions, objects being thrown or returned, are almost certainly cases of disorientation and acoustic confusion that commonly affect individuals in prolonged low visibility conditions. We've documented similar perceptual distortions in mountaineers experiencing whiteout conditions and sailors in dense maritime fog. While the duration and density of this particular fog formation is unusual, all observed phenomena fall within the range of documented natural atmospheric behavior. We expect gradual dissipation to begin within the next 48 hours as approaching weather systems alter the current pressure patterns. Residents should continue to exercise caution regarding travel and maintain communication with local authorities. But there is no scientific basis for some of the more sensationalized claims that have been circulating through social media and unofficial sources.
That assessment from Dr. Stevens provides some reassurance after days of uncertainty. However, the situation on the ground continues to present challenges. Let's check in with Judy Barton, who remains our correspondent inside the affected area. Judy, how do Dr. Stevens' explanations align with what you're experiencing firsthand?
David, I appreciate Dr. Stevens' scientific analysis, but I have to respectfully disagree with several of her conclusions based on what I've witnessed over the past 3 days. The evacuation efforts she mentioned are very real. I've seen convoys of state vehicles moving through the fog this morning, and they're using loudspeakers to announce that transportation is available for anyone wanting to leave voluntarily. What's concerning is how few people are taking advantage of these evacuations. I've spoken with at least a dozen residents today, and most of them are choosing to stay, not because they're not concerned, but because they're afraid of what might happen if they venture out into the fog to reach the evacuation points. Mrs. Eleanor Davis, who lives about 2 blocks from the main evacuation staging area on Church Street, told me she started walking toward the pickup point this morning, but turned back after hearing what she described as something large moving alongside her in the fog. She couldn't see it, but she could hear footsteps or movement that matched her pace, and when she stopped, the sound stopped. When she continued walking, they resumed. She said it felt like something was following her, staying just out of sight in the fog, and she became so unnerved that she returned home and decided to wait it out rather than risk the walk to the evacuation site.
Judy, that sounds like it could align with Dr. Stevens' explanation about disorientation and acoustic confusion. Are you finding that residents are generally reporting similar types of experiences?
David, while I understand the desire to find rational explanations, what residents are describing goes beyond simple disorientation. Tom Martinez, who runs the hardware store on Main Street, has become something of an unofficial gathering point for people in town, and he's been keeping detailed notes of what customers are reporting. According to his log, which he showed me this afternoon, there have been 7 separate incidents where people reported encountering what they describe as large shapes moving through the fog. Not shadows or unclear objects that could be explained by visibility issues, but shapes that seem to respond to light or movement. 3 different people reported shining flashlights into the fog and seeing something large retreat or move away from the light beam. Even more troubling, there have been 2 reports of people finding damage to property that occurred during the night when no humans were moving around. Janet Walsh discovered her garden fence had been completely destroyed, not blown down by wind, but broken in a pattern that suggests something very large stepped or pushed through it. The wooden posts weren't just broken, they were splintered in ways that would require tremendous force, and there were impressions in the soft ground near the fence that she describes as resembling tracks, though not from any animal she recognizes. Dr. Stevens mentioned disorientation affecting individuals, but what we're seeing here are consistent reports from multiple people who don't know each other, describing similar encounters and physical evidence that can't be explained by psychological effects or perceptual confusion. The fog isn't just disorienting people. Something inside it is interacting with the physical environment in ways that leave measurable damage.
Judy, have you been able to document any of this physical evidence yourself? And what's the response been from the evacuation teams when residents report these encounters?
I have photographed the fence damage at Mrs. Walsh's property, and David, I have to tell you, the destruction pattern is unlike anything I've seen from storm damage or vandalism. The breaks are clean but powerful, and whatever caused them had to be substantial in size and strength. As for the evacuation teams, that's where things become really concerning. I managed to approach one of the state vehicles this morning and spoke with the driver, Sergeant Collins from the National Guard. When I asked him about the reports residents are making, he admitted that evacuation personnel have been instructed not to operate alone and to maintain constant radio contact with their command post. He wouldn't elaborate on why these precautions were necessary, but he did say that several evacuation vehicles have reported equipment malfunctions and unusual circumstances while operating inside the fog zone. The most telling detail, David, is that the evacuation vehicles are all equipped with extremely powerful floodlights, not just headlights, but military-grade illumination systems mounted on their roofs. When I asked why such extensive lighting was necessary for a fog evacuation, Sergeant Collins said it was standard procedure for low visibility operations. But these aren't standard fog lights. They're the kind of high-intensity systems you'd use for search and rescue operations or crowd control, and they're all directed outward from the vehicles, not just forward for navigation.
That certainly suggests authorities are taking precautions beyond what would be normal for weather-related evacuations. Judy, what's your assessment of the overall mood among residents who are choosing to remain? And do you feel safe continuing your coverage from inside the fog zone?
The mood among residents has shifted significantly, David. The initial concern and confusion has given way to a kind of determined vigilance. People are staying in groups. Nobody's going out alone after dark. And there's an unspoken understanding that something is very wrong here, regardless of what official explanations are being offered. Tom Martinez has essentially turned his hardware store into a community center where people check in with each other, share supplies, and compare notes about what they're experiencing. He's been selling flashlights, batteries, and basic camping supplies at cost. And he told me that people are preparing for the possibility that this situation could continue much longer than authorities are predicting. The hardware store has become a safe haven of sorts, and Tom has organized informal watch schedules where groups of residents take turns monitoring the area around the store throughout the night. As for my own safety, I'll be honest, I'm no longer comfortable moving around alone, especially after sunset. I've arranged to stay at the Millfield Inn tonight, which is close to the hardware store and has several other guests who are in similar situations. The inn's owner, Patricia Chen, has been keeping all the exterior lights on throughout the night and has asked guests to stay in groups when moving between rooms. She told me that 2 nights ago, something triggered the motion sensor lights in the parking lot repeatedly throughout the night. But when she looked out the windows, she couldn't see anything that would cause the sensors to activate. What's most unsettling, David, is the growing consensus among residents that Dr. Stevens' press conference felt like an attempt to downplay a situation that's far more serious than officials are willing to acknowledge publicly. People here aren't prone to mass hysteria or conspiracy theories, but they're living with these conditions every day, and they know what they're experiencing can't be explained away as weather-related disorientation. The physical evidence, the equipment failures, the withdrawal of emergency services, and now evacuation protocols that suggest authorities expect dangerous conditions after dark. All of this points to a situation that goes far beyond what the National Weather Service is characterizing as natural atmospheric phenomena.
Judy, please continue to prioritize your safety and maintain regular contact with our newsroom. We'll be following this story closely and providing updates as new information becomes available. For viewers in the affected areas, evacuation transportation continues to be available during daylight hours by contacting the emergency coordination number we've posted on our website. Coming up after this break, we'll have reaction from local officials to Dr. Stevens' press conference and an update on the highway closures that are now affecting commerce throughout the region. For those with family or friends in the fog zone, we encourage you to maintain contact and stay informed through official channels. This is Channel 7 News, and we'll be right back.
Brothers and sisters, I come before you today with a heavy heart because I have been watching the signs that are manifesting in our land, and I tell you with certainty that this is not mere weather, but the hand of God moving in judgment upon this nation and this world. The prophet Joel warned us that in the last days there would be blood and fire and pillars of smoke, and the sun would be turned to darkness before the great and terrible day of the Lord. This strange fog is exactly the kind of manifestation Scripture promises will announce God's judgment. For too long, we have lived as if God does not see. We've shed innocent blood, mocked holy matrimony, worshiped wealth while ignoring the cries of the poor, and pushed His word out of our schools, our courts, and our government. Now the Almighty is answering our rebellion with signs that cannot be ignored or explained away by the so-called wisdom of this world. Beloved, the animals know what we have forgotten. When God moves, creation trembles. When you see cattle refusing to graze and dogs hiding in fear, it is the same response that came when Jesus was crucified and the earth shook. The sun grew dark and creation itself bore witness to divine judgment. Isaiah declared that when the Lord rises to shake the earth, men will cast away their idols and flee to caves and rocks. The fear and confusion you see now is just the beginning of that great shaking, a separation between those who belong to the Lord and those who harden their hearts against Him. But saints of God, this is not a time for despair, but for preparation. The same God who judged the world in Noah's day also made a way of escape, and He will protect those who call on His name. So examine your hearts, turn from sin, cry out for mercy while mercy can still be found. This fog is not only physical but spiritual, a shadow of the darkness already overtaking the hearts of men. But do not be afraid, greater is He who is in you than he who is in the world. Stand firm, put on the armor of God, and remember that the one who delivered Daniel from the lions and Shadrach from the fire is the same today and forever. Let us pray for protection, wisdom, and courage in these days, knowing that our God will not abandon His people. Amen.
This is Channel 7 News. I'm David Weeks, interrupting our regular programming with urgent breaking developments in what authorities are now calling a critical containment failure regarding the atmospheric phenomenon that has surrounded portions of our Tri-County area for the past 4 days. Within the last hour, multiple emergency command posts have gone silent, and our own instruments here at the station are detecting rapid changes suggesting the fog is expanding at a dangerous rate. Spotters on our tower report the fog wall is now visible on the western horizon and advancing toward this facility. Based on the current trajectory, we may lose the ability to broadcast within 30 to 45 minutes. Backup systems are being prepared, but our signal could be cut at any moment. For now, we're going live to Judy Barton in the field. Judy, can you hear us?
David, I can barely hold this connection. Everything federal officials have been telling the public is false. I'm barricaded inside my van about 3 miles east of Millfield, and I need to say this clearly. We are not dealing with a natural phenomenon. I have seen things moving in the fog. An hour ago, a tentacle at least 40 feet long, covered in wet, glistening flesh, reached out and dragged a cow into the fog canopy. One moment it was screaming, the next it was gone. The fog swallowed it. And then came the voices. For the past 30 minutes, I've been hearing my own voice outside this van. It repeats phrases I've said, but wrong, twisted, broken. Sometimes it's my mother's voice. Sometimes voices I don't even know. They're hollow, like masks being worn badly. David, the movement I've observed shows hunting behavior. They're drawn to sound, to vibration, to movement. I hear them dragging themselves across the pavement, slamming into buildings, scraping along walls. A car alarm went off 20 minutes ago, and every sound converged on that spot. The alarm cut off abruptly, followed by tearing metal and what I can only call feeding noises. The fog itself reacts to light. My headlights make it recoil as if it feels pain. When lightning flashes, I see impossible shapes, masses of limbs, writhing flesh, things that look like they exist in more dimensions than we can comprehend.
Judy, our data here confirms what you're describing. Weather monitors show pressure changes like tornadoes, electromagnetic spikes that don't match any known signatures, and temperatures swinging 40 degrees in seconds. Out our studio windows, I can see it myself. The fog is not drifting like natural mist. It's advancing like a wall, solid, towering 200 feet high with sharp geometric edges. Inside, there are lights moving in perfect sequences, pulsing in patterns like communication signals. Our security cameras show shapes within, huge bodies moving along deliberate paths, scanning, cataloging, mapping everything in their way.
David, it's outside the van. Something enormous is brushing against the metal, making the whole vehicle shake. The voices have shifted. Now it's fragments, pieces of screams, bits of conversation strung together. They sound like recordings, but broken, distorted. The air inside has turned freezing. My breath is visible, and it tastes metallic, like machinery. The roof is buckling, not cracking, but warping, like the metal is becoming liquid. Frost is spreading across the windows in unnatural, geometric patterns, as though crystallizing by rules outside our physics. I need this on record. These creatures are not from here. They are not trying to communicate or conquer. They are feeding, David. We're just prey, or worse, raw material.
Judy, your audio is breaking up, but we're receiving part of it. Viewers, I must tell you, the fog has now reached our building. Visibility is zero. Electronic interference is worsening. Several staff report hearing voices of family members outside, though we've confirmed all are safe elsewhere. Security teams report breathing and whispering in the ventilation system, sounds in no known language. Our backup generators are cycling without cause, and radio equipment is picking up structured transmissions on frequencies impossible to reach without military hardware. If these are from inside the fog, then whatever is in there is coordinated, intelligent, and organized.
David, it's on top of the van. I can hear the metal bending, groaning, like something pressing down without even understanding what it's crushing. There's a chemical stench, rotting flowers mixed with acid, the sound of liquid sliding through solid matter. The frost has formed symmetrical, crystalline designs, too perfect to be natural. I can hear them now, David. Not words, but screams, laughter, broken voices pieced together into a horrible chorus. They're not trying to speak. They're just repeating fragments of everything they've consumed. We're not survivors. We're just ingredients in something unthinkable.
Judy, your signal is gone. Viewers, Channel 7 has lost contact with our correspondent. The fog has engulfed our building. External communications are down. Emergency power is failing. Inside the studio, we too are experiencing distortions, auditory anomalies, disorientation, and what can only be described as a presence. If we go off air, it may be some time before any transmission resumes. To those outside the affected zone, document what you've heard tonight. Demand answers. And most importantly, trust no voice calling from the fog. These things can mimic perfectly, and they will use your loved ones against you. Do not enter the fog. Do not search for survivors. This is not a prison. It's a trap. And once you're inside, you may never come back out. This is David Weeks, Channel 7 News. God help us all.
All right, folks, we're back on Truth Frequency with your host, Carl Grimes, and I got to tell you, what I'm about to share with you is going to blow your minds. We've got Dan Jessup on the line, former Army Special Forces, worked Black Ops for 15 years before he went private contractor. Dan reached out to me yesterday claiming he has inside information about what's really happening with these fog formations that are spreading across the country. Dan, I got to ask you straight up, you're putting yourself at serious risk talking to us about this, aren't you? I mean, if what you're telling me is true, there are people who really don't want this information getting out.
Carl, I've been carrying this secret for 3 years, watching the news coverage and listening to these so-called experts talk about atmospheric anomalies and interdimensional theories. And I can't stay silent anymore because people are dying and they deserve to know the truth. What's happening right now, these fog formations, the creatures, the systematic expansion across multiple states, this isn't some random invasion or natural phenomenon. This is the direct result of a classified military research program called Project Gateway that I was assigned to from 2019 to 2021. The Army has been experimenting with dimensional barrier manipulation for the past decade, trying to develop tactical advantages by accessing parallel realities and alternate dimensional spaces. I was part of the security team at a facility in Nevada where they were using something called a dimensional resonance array, basically a massive electromagnetic field generator designed to create temporary tiers in what they called reality fabric. The goal was to allow our forces to access pocket dimensions where they could stage equipment, conduct surveillance, or even launch surprise attacks by emerging from dimensional spaces that enemy forces couldn't detect or defend against. But Carl, the thing about messing with dimensional barriers is that you can't control what's on the other side when you open those doors. The scientist running Gateway kept insisting they were creating sterile pocket dimensions, empty spaces that existed parallel to our reality, but contained no indigenous life forms. They were dead wrong, and I tried to warn them about what we were seeing during the early tests, but nobody wanted to listen to security concerns when they thought they were developing the ultimate military advantage.
Wait, hold up. So you're telling me the military has been ripping holes between dimensions for years, and you guys knew there were things on the other side? Jesus, Dan, that's insane. What exactly were you seeing during these tests that made you think something was wrong?
During the early Gateway tests in 2020, we started detecting what the scientists called anomalous readings. Electromagnetic signatures that suggested the dimensional spaces we were accessing weren't empty like they'd assumed. But instead of shutting down the program, they got excited because they thought they'd discovered some kind of exotic energy source that could be harnessed for military applications. The array created what was supposed to be a small controlled dimensional aperture, maybe 3 feet in diameter, that would remain open for exactly 90 seconds. But something from the other side immediately began probing the opening, sending through what looked like organic appendages that started testing the edges of the aperture and attempting to widen it. I was stationed about 50 yards from the array when this happened, and Carl, I'm telling you, these weren't random tentacles or animal parts. These were intelligent probes being used by something that understood exactly what our equipment was and how to interact with it. The appendages were wrapped in some kind of organic material that created electromagnetic interference patterns, almost like they were trying to disrupt our control systems and keep the aperture open longer than we'd programmed. The scientists were fascinated instead of terrified, documenting everything and talking about establishing controlled contact protocols with whatever intelligence was on the other side. Dr. Sarah Chen, who is the project director, actually proposed expanding the program to create larger, more stable apertures that would allow for direct communication and possibly even limited exchange of personnel or materials. That's when I knew we were dealing with people who had completely lost perspective on the dangers we were unleashing.
That's absolutely terrifying, Dan. So these military scientists were basically opening doorways to another dimension, and something intelligent immediately started trying to force its way through? And instead of shutting it down, they wanted to make bigger doorways? What the hell were they thinking?
Kyle, you have to understand the mindset of these people. They were convinced they were on the verge of the greatest military breakthrough in human history. The ability to access alternate dimensional spaces would have given the United States an insurmountable tactical advantage over any enemy force. They were thinking about staging areas that couldn't be detected by satellite surveillance, supply lines that couldn't be interdicted, and strike capabilities that could bypass every known defensive system. But what they refused to acknowledge was that we weren't the only intelligence involved in these experiments. Whatever was on the other side of those dimensional apertures was studying us just as intensively as we were studying them. And they were learning about our technology, our defensive capabilities, and our dimensional manipulation techniques every time we opened those doorways. During the final gateway test in August 2021, something went catastrophically wrong. Dr. Chen had convinced her superiors to authorize what she called a major aperture event, a dimensional opening large enough to allow human personnel to pass through for direct reconnaissance of the alternate dimensional space. The array was configured to create a doorway approximately 8 feet in diameter that would remain stable for 15 minutes, with a full tactical team prepared to conduct the first human dimensional reconnaissance mission. But Carl, the moment that aperture opened, we weren't looking at an empty alternate dimension. We were looking directly into some kind of staging area, where dozens of the creatures were waiting in organized formations, like they'd been preparing for exactly this moment. They didn't just stumble through our doorway. They launched a coordinated assault that suggested they'd been planning for this opportunity and had detailed intelligence about our facility, our personnel, and our defensive capabilities.
Holy shit, Dan. So you're saying these creatures were ready for you? Like they knew you were going to open that doorway, and they had an invasion force just waiting on the other side? How is that even possible?
Carl, that's exactly what I'm telling you, and it's the part of this story that nobody in the military wants to acknowledge, because it means we weren't conducting research. We were being researched. Every time we opened those smaller apertures during the previous tests, the creatures were gathering intelligence about our dimensional manipulation technology, mapping our facility, identifying our personnel, and planning for the moment when we'd create an opening large enough for them to exploit. The assault on the Nevada facility was swift and methodical. The creatures came through that aperture in coordinated waves. First, the smaller reconnaissance units that immediately began mapping our defensive positions, then larger combat units that systematically neutralized our security teams, and finally what appeared to be technical specialists that began interacting with our array equipment in ways that suggested they understood our technology better than we did. Within 30 minutes, they had taken control of the entire facility and were using our own array to create additional apertures at specific coordinates that I later realized corresponded to strategic locations across the United States. They weren't just invading our facility, they were using our equipment to establish a network of dimensional access points that would allow them to conduct operations anywhere they wanted without warning. I was part of a small security team that managed to escape the facility during the initial assault, and we spent the next 48 hours watching from a distance as the creatures systematically dismantled our equipment and transported components back through the dimensional apertures. But here's the terrifying part, Carl. They didn't just steal our technology and leave. They left behind modified versions of our array components that continued to operate autonomously, creating the kind of localized dimensional disturbances that we're now seeing in the form of these fog formations.
Wait, so you're telling me that these fog zones that are popping up all over the country are actually dimensional doorways that are being opened by modified military equipment that the creature stole and reprogrammed? That's beyond terrifying, Dan. What happened to the rest of your team, and why isn't the military telling people what they're really dealing with?
My team was debriefed by people so far above my clearance level that I never even learned their names, and we were given what they called permanent classification protocols, which basically means if we ever talked about what happened at Gateway, we'd face treason charges and life imprisonment. The official story is that the Nevada facility experienced a catastrophic equipment failure that resulted in the deaths of all personnel, and the entire project was classified beyond top secret, with all research materials transferred to appropriate agencies for ongoing analysis. But Carl, The reason the military isn't warning people about what they're really facing is because acknowledging the truth would mean admitting that our own government created the technology that made this invasion possible, and that our dimensional manipulation experiments provided these creatures with detailed intelligence about human defensive capabilities and strategic vulnerabilities. Every fog formation that appears is a localized dimensional aperture being generated by modified versions of our own array technology. The creatures are using our own research to systematically convert sections of our reality into environments where they can operate freely, and they're expanding these zones using tactical intelligence they gathered during 3 years of studying our military capabilities through the Gateway experiments. The fog isn't just cover for these creatures, it's a localized alteration of dimensional physics that makes it possible for entities from their reality to exist and function in ours. And because they're using modified versions of our own technology, our military has no effective countermeasures because any defensive systems we develop are based on the same dimensional manipulation principles that the creatures now understand better than we do. What's happening in places like Millfield isn't random predation, it's systematic intelligence gathering designed to map human population centers, defensive strategies, and social organization patterns so the creatures can optimize their expansion operations. They're not just invading, they're conducting the same kind of strategic reconnaissance that our military would conduct before launching operations in enemy territory, and they learned how to do it by studying our own tactical doctrines during the Gateway experiments.
This is absolutely mind-blowing, Dan. So basically, our own military created the technology that made this invasion possible, gave the creatures 3 years to study our capabilities, and now they're using our own equipment against us while the government covers up their responsibility for the whole disaster?
That's exactly right, Carl, and it gets worse because the creatures aren't just using our technology, they've improved it. Dimensional apertures they're creating now are more stable and cover larger areas than anything we achieved during Gateway, which suggests they've solved technical problems that our scientists couldn't overcome. They're not just copying our research, they're advancing it beyond our current capabilities. The fog formations appearing across multiple states represent a level of dimensional manipulation that's far beyond what we thought was possible, and it's being orchestrated by entities that learned everything they know about dimensional physics by studying our own experiments. We didn't just open doorways for them, we gave them a complete education in how to manipulate the fundamental structure of reality itself. What terrifies me most is that based on the expansion patterns I'm seeing in the news, I think they're preparing for something much larger than these localized fog zones. The systematic way they're establishing these dimensional apertures suggests they're creating a network of staging areas for operations that could affect entire regions, or possibly even the whole continent. Carl, I'm risking everything by talking to you about this, but people deserve to know that their own government created the conditions for this disaster, and that conventional military responses will be ineffective, because we're fighting enemies that understand our own technology better than we do. The only hope for survival is for people to understand that these aren't random monsters, they're strategic operators using advanced versions of our own dimensional manipulation technology to systematically colonize our reality.
Dan, this has been absolutely incredible and terrifying. Any final thoughts for people who might be facing these fog formations or who want to prepare for what might be coming next?
Carl, the most important thing people need to understand is that these creatures are not random predators. They're military strategists conducting systematic colonization operations using advanced technology based on our own research. Conventional survival tactics won't work because they've studied human defensive strategies for 3 years and developed countermeasures for everything we might try. If you encounter fog formations, get as far away as possible immediately because they represent active dimensional manipulation zones where normal physics may not apply and where creatures with superior tactical intelligence are conducting operations. Don't try to establish defensive positions because they'll use your own defensive preparations to learn about human capabilities and develop better strategies for overcoming resistance. Most importantly, don't trust official government explanations about these events because the people responsible for creating this situation have every reason to cover up their role in making it possible. The Gateway Project gave these creatures everything they needed to systematically colonize our reality, and acknowledging that truth would mean admitting that our own government bears responsibility for what may be the end of human civilization as we know it.
Folks, that was Dan Jessup, former Army Special Forces and Gateway Project security team member, revealing what may be the most important story of our lifetime. If what Dan is telling us is true, then these fog formations aren't a natural disaster or even a conventional invasion. They're the direct result of military experiments that gave interdimensional colonizers the technology and intelligence they needed to systematically convert our reality into something they can inhabit. We'll be following this story closely, and I encourage everyone to document everything they can about these fog formations because the official sources clearly can't be trusted to tell us the truth. This is Carl Grimes on Truth Frequency, and we'll be back after these messages with more analysis of what might be the most important cover-up in human history.
This is David Weeks with Channel 7 News. We're broadcasting on emergency power from our studio, which has been completely surrounded by the fog phenomenon for the past 6 hours. Our building has experienced repeated impacts against the exterior walls, complete power grid failure, and total communication breakdown with our field units. However, we have managed to reestablish limited contact with our correspondent Judy Barton through emergency radio frequencies. Judy, we're relieved to hear you're safe. Can you tell us what happened after you escaped from your van and how you reached your current location?
David, I'm broadcasting from inside Martinez Hardware on Main Street in Millfield, where approximately 23 people have taken shelter over the past several hours. After my van was compromised by whatever was in the fog, I barely managed to escape through the rear doors during what seemed like a feeding frenzy. The creatures were so focused on tearing apart the vehicle that they didn't immediately notice me crawling away into the mist. I followed power lines and fence posts for nearly 2 miles, moving only when I heard them occupied elsewhere, until I found Mrs. Chen, Mr. Walsh, and several other survivors who had established a guide rope system between buildings. They brought me to the hardware store around midnight, where Tom Martinez had already organized what he calls a defensive perimeter.
Judy, you mentioned escaping from creatures that were feeding on your van. Were you able to see what caused the damage? And what's the current situation at the hardware store in terms of security and supplies?
David, what I witnessed in my van confirms everything I reported during that terrifying broadcast. Before I escaped, I saw the roof completely crushed inward by something massive, and the metal was twisted in ways that would require tremendous strength. There were deep gouges along the sides that looked almost like claw marks, though much larger than any animal I'm familiar with. The front windshield had been torn away entirely, not shattered, but literally peeled back like paper. And the sounds, David, the feeding noises I described were real. Something was consuming parts of the vehicle itself, making horrible wet grinding sounds. The hardware store has become our lifeline, David. Tom Martinez has been preparing for this kind of situation since the second day of the fog, and he's organized the space remarkably well. We have battery-powered lighting throughout the store, emergency food and water supplies, basic medical equipment, and most importantly, Tom has reinforced all the entry points with steel brackets and heavy lumber. He's set up watch stations at each window where groups of 2 people monitor the exterior using high-powered flashlights, and he's established communication schedules so we can maintain contact with each other and with outside emergency services when possible. What's most impressive is how Tom has organized the survivors. We have a retired nurse, Margaret Foster, who's handling medical needs. Bill Rodriguez from the gas station brought emergency fuel for our generators, and Janet Walsh, the meteorologist I mentioned in earlier reports, has been tracking patterns in the fog density and the timing of creature activity. She's noticed that whatever is out there becomes most active during the hours between sunset and sunrise, and that the creatures seem to avoid areas with concentrated artificial lighting, though they will probe the edges of illuminated zones.
That's encouraging to hear that you found organized shelter with adequate supplies. Judy, you mentioned creature activity. Have you and the other survivors had direct encounters with whatever is moving in the fog since you arrived at the hardware store? And what can you tell us about the nature of these entities?
David, we've had several encounters that have given us a clearer picture of what we're dealing with, though I want to emphasize that visibility remains extremely limited, and much of what I'm reporting is based on brief sightings and physical evidence rather than extended observation. About 3 hours ago, Bill Rodriguez was monitoring the rear window when he saw what he describes as tentacles, not metaphorically, but actual appendages that appeared to be probing the exterior wall near the loading dock. He called several of us over to witness it, and we could see through the fog what looked like thick, muscular extensions reaching around the corner of the building, testing the window frame and the metal security grating Tom had installed. The tentacles were easily 6 feet long and thick enough that Bill estimates they would require considerable strength to control. And they moved with what seemed like deliberate purpose, feeling along the wall as if searching for entry points. More disturbing was what happened about an hour later. Mrs. Foster was taking her turn at the front window watch when she witnessed what she calls the most horrible thing I've ever seen. According to her account, a man emerged from the fog and began walking toward the store, someone she recognized as Dave Miller, a local farmer who had been reported missing 2 days ago. She was about to call out to him and unlock the door when she realized something was wrong with his movement. She said he was walking in a perfectly straight line with no hesitation or confusion despite the fog, and his arms were hanging at his sides in an unnatural position. As Dave Miller got closer to the building, Mrs. Foster could see that he appeared to be injured or ill. His clothes were torn and stained, and there was something wrong with his posture. But what terrified her most was that he never called out for help or showed any sign of recognizing that there were people inside the store. He walked directly to the front door and began pushing against it with steady, mechanical pressure, never speaking or acknowledging the voices of people inside calling his name. Miss Foster said his eyes were open, but they seemed unfocused. And when Tom tried to communicate with him through the door, Dave Miller gave no response except to continue pushing against the barrier with increasing force until something in the fog made a low sound, and he turned and walked back into the mist as mechanically as he had approached.
Judy, that account is deeply disturbing. Are you suggesting that Dave Miller was somehow being controlled, or that he had been altered in some way by his experience in the fog? And how are the other survivors processing these encounters?
David, I don't want to speculate beyond what we've observed, but the consensus among the survivors here is that whatever happened to Dave Miller during his time in the fog has fundamentally changed him, whether that's injury, illness, or something else entirely. We can't determine from our brief sighting. What we do know is that his behavior was completely inconsistent with someone seeking help or shelter. Tom Martinez, who has known Dave Miller for 15 years, said the man who approached our door bore no resemblance to the Dave Miller he's worked with on numerous construction projects. The mechanical movement, the lack of communication, the failure to respond to his own name. Tom believes that whatever we saw was no longer the Dave Miller we knew, regardless of physical appearance. The psychological impact on our group has been significant. David, we're dealing with the reality that people who disappear into the fog may not simply be killed or taken away. They may be returned in altered states that pose additional dangers to survivors. This has led to some very difficult discussions about security protocols and how we respond if other familiar faces appear outside our shelter. Tom has made the decision that no one enters the store after dark, regardless of who they appear to be or what condition they seem to be in, until we can verify their identity and mental state during daylight hours. Margaret Foster, our nurse, has raised concerns about potential exposure to biological agents, infectious diseases, or toxins that might explain the behavioral changes we observed. She's implementing basic quarantine procedures and has suggested that anyone who has been directly exposed to the fog for extended periods should be isolated and monitored before being admitted to our group shelter. It's a harsh decision, but given the uncertainty about what causes the changes we witnessed in Dave Miller, most of the survivors agree that we cannot risk compromising the safety of the group by admitting people whose mental state or physical condition may have been altered by prolonged exposure to whatever is in the fog.
Judy, those are extraordinary precautions for what began as a weather phenomenon. Here at the studio, we've been experiencing our own challenges throughout the night. Something has been systematically testing our building's structural integrity, and we've heard sounds that suggest multiple large entities moving around our facility. Our security cameras captured brief images before failing completely, and what we saw defies easy categorization. We've also had our own encounter with altered human behavior. About 2 hours ago, our janitor Marcus Webb, who left the building yesterday afternoon before the fog arrived, appeared at our main entrance. Like your experience with Dave Miller, Marcus showed no response to our voices calling his name, and his behavior was mechanical and purposeless. He remained at our door for nearly 30 minutes, occasionally pushing or pulling at the handle, but never speaking or showing recognition of his coworkers inside. When we activated our emergency PA system to try to communicate with him, he showed no reaction to the sound and eventually walked back into the fog with the same mechanical gait with which he had approached. Judy, based on your observations and the experiences of the survivors with you, what's your assessment of how long your group can maintain your current defensive position? And what kind of assistance would be most helpful if outside agencies are able to establish rescue operations?
David, Tom Martinez estimates we have supplies for approximately 1 week if we maintain strict rationing, though much depends on whether we can maintain our lighting and power systems. Our greatest vulnerabilities are our dependence on generator fuel for the exterior lights that seem to keep the creatures at a distance, and our limited medical supplies if anyone is injured during encounters with whatever is outside. As for rescue operations, I have to be honest with your viewers. Based on what we've learned about the nature of the entities in the fog and the apparent alteration of people who are exposed to them for extended periods, I'm not optimistic that conventional rescue methods will be effective. Any rescue team would face the same risks we're facing, with the additional challenge of operating in unfamiliar terrain under conditions that compromise communications, navigation, and equipment functionality. What we need most is information about the nature of these entities and the mechanism by which they alter human behavior, because until we understand what we're dealing with, our defensive measures are purely reactive. Tom has been documenting patterns in creature activity, timing of approaches, and responses to different types of lighting and sounds, but we need expertise from outside sources to analyze this data and develop more effective countermeasures. Most critically, we need to know whether the fog itself is the source of the threat or whether it's simply providing cover for entities that originate from somewhere else entirely, because that distinction will determine whether we're waiting for a weather phenomenon to pass or dealing with an invasion that requires a completely different kind of response. Right now, David, we're surviving hour by hour, but we need answers if we're going to have any hope of lasting until official help arrives.
Judy, we'll continue monitoring your situation and relaying any information we receive from emergency services or scientific sources that might help your group. Please maintain regular communication with us as long as technically possible, and know that your reports are providing crucial documentation of these extraordinary circumstances. For our viewers, we continue to broadcast from our emergency studio, though we cannot predict how long our technical capabilities will remain functional. We urge anyone in affected areas to follow the example of the Millfield survivors. Seek shelter in secure buildings with adequate lighting, maintain group cohesion, and avoid any contact with individuals who may have been altered by prolonged exposure to the fog conditions. This is David Weeks with Channel 7 News, and we'll continue providing coverage of this developing crisis as long as we are able.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
My fellow Americans, believe me, I'm speaking to you tonight from the very famous Oval Office, the best office, the most powerful office in the world during what some are saying, and I agree, is maybe the most unbelievable challenge our great nation has ever faced. We've seen a lot of things in America, tremendous things, some bad things, but folks, this one is right out of a movie, okay? They said it's like The Mist, it's like Ghostbusters, it's like War of the Worlds, except it's real, and it's happening here, and it's happening now. And let me tell you, no one's ever dealt with something like this before, but we are dealing with it, and we're dealing with it strongly. The fog, very strange fog. People are calling it the Trump fog because I'm the only one who can handle it. Started in the Midwest. Great people there, by the way. Love the farmers, love Iowa. And now it's moving. It's spreading into many states, 7 at least, maybe more. Our scientists, the best scientists, not the fake ones who said I couldn't win, but the real ones, the strong ones, they're telling us this is not regular weather. It's not like rain. It's not like snow. It's not even like Twister, a very good movie, by the way. And inside the fog, hostile entities, they're saying. Not friendly, not like E.T., more like Predator, more like Alien. But we're ready for them, believe me. I met with the generals, the best generals, our incredible Joint Chiefs, the guys from intelligence, very smart, very tough. I said, what is this? Is it China? Is it Russia? Is it Independence Day? And they said, sir, it's worse. Can you believe it? Worse. So I did what no other president would do. I declared a national emergency faster than anybody, faster than FEMA. We're mobilizing the National Guard. We're sending in resources like you wouldn't believe. More resources than you saw in Hurricane Katrina, which, by the way, was handled very poorly. Everybody knows that. And we're doing it bigger, stronger, and better than ever before. Now, let's talk about your families, your loved ones. People keep asking me, sir, what about my aunt? What about my cousin? What about my dog in the fog? Let me tell you, we're not leaving anybody behind. We love our people. We love our dogs, some of the best dogs in the world, and we're going to save as many as we can. But you've got to understand this fog, it's tough, it's dangerous. Our soldiers are heroes, like in Saving Private Ryan. Very heroic, but we're not sending them in to get eaten by whatever's in there without a plan. We're making new plans, beautiful plans, never before seen plans, and we're going to win. Now, I've heard the rumors, a lot of fake news out there. They say it's a government experiment. They say it's Area 51. They say it's me testing out new weather machines because I wanted to build a fog wall instead of a border wall. Totally false, folks, totally fake. Look, if I had a fog machine that big, do you think I'd test it in Ohio? No, I'd put it over CNN headquarters. But this isn't us. It's not our fault. It's something else, maybe from another dimension, maybe from outer space. But whatever it is, we're going to figure it out, and we're going to do it fast. So here's what I'm telling you. Stay calm, stay strong, don't panic, like in those disaster movies where people run screaming down the streets. Don't be like World War Z. Be like Rocky. Be tough. Be winners. If you're near the fog, don't go sightseeing. Don't take selfies. Don't be stupid. Stay away. Stay safe. And let the very strong, very capable Smith administration handle it. We're working with our allies, the good ones, not the freeloaders, and with the smartest people in the world to solve this, and we're going to do it. And I'll say this in closing. America has been through tough times before. Civil War, Great Depression, 9/11, tough. But we always win. Always. And this time, we're going to win bigger than ever before, because that's what we do. We win. So stay safe. Trust your president. Trust your country. And remember, we don't run from the fog. We make the fog run from us. God bless you. God bless our tremendous military. And God bless the United States of America, the greatest country in the history of the world. Thank you very much.
This is David Weeks with Channel 7 News, broadcasting tonight under emergency power as our station remains cut off by the fog. We've been trapped here nearly a full day, our communications failing one by one, and unknown entities probing our defenses. Yet despite these challenges, we remain committed to bringing you the truth of what's happening beyond these walls. We've managed to restore a fragile link to Judy Barton at the Martinez hardware store in Millfield. Survivors there have been holding out against mounting threats, but tonight they've encountered something altogether new. Judy, what can you tell us about the situation where you are?
David, I hardly know where to begin. At dawn, we were hit by an attack unlike anything we've seen since this crisis began. It started with our exterior lights. One by one, they were shattered not by power failures, but by deliberate strikes. Tom Martinez and Bill Rodriguez actually saw something slam into the floodlight above the rear door, snapping the housing apart as if it had been targeted. Within minutes, all remaining lights were destroyed. That's when we heard it, a high-pitched buzzing, thin at first, but quickly swelling into a chorus from every direction. Then they emerged from the fog. Dozens of winged creatures moving in organized swarms. They're about 2 feet long, wings translucent and almost metallic in the way they caught what little light remained. And David, these weren't random panicked animals. They flew in patterns, circling the building as if studying it, then converging on our weakest points. When 3 forced their way through a ventilation grate, the precision of their attack left no doubt. They didn't scatter. They went straight for Janet Walsh. 2 flanked her while the 3rd struck head on. She screamed once, and then she was stung. The wound looked like nothing, a pinprick, but within minutes, concentric blisters began to rise, filling with greenish fluid, spreading in perfect circles as if drawn with a compass. And the numbness spread with them, creeping outward, inch by inch, unstoppable.
That's devastating to hear, Judy. For our viewers, these reports represent a dramatic escalation from the larger ground entities we've covered in earlier broadcasts. Judy, can you tell us what became of Janet, and how is your group coping with the reality of airborne attacks on top of everything else you've been facing?
David, I regret to report that Janet did not survive. Less than 6 hours after she was stung, the paralysis reached her lungs and she slipped away despite Margaret Foster's desperate efforts. It has shaken us, but it has also stripped away any illusions. We now understand absolutely that even the smallest contact with these flying creatures is a death sentence. Tom Martinez has sealed every vent, every pipe, every opening with metal sheeting, foam, and tape. No one opens a door or window for any reason. Bill Rodriguez has turned half the store into a workshop, converting tools into weapons. We now have extended handle hatchets, modified nail guns, even propane torches rigged as makeshift flamethrowers. What's most unsettling, David, is the coordination. When the flyers forced their way inside, the larger things in the fog pressed our barricades in unison. It was a distraction, one group drawing our defenders while another tested our doors. These aren't random attacks. They're calculated, multi-pronged strategies. The death of Janet has weighed heavily on us, but it has also left us grimly united. People who swore they'd never raise a weapon are now carrying improvised spears. We're fighting not only for survival, but against the kind of death Janet endured. No one here is willing to go that way.
Judy, we're deeply sorry for your loss. For the benefit of our viewers, we've asked Dr. John Ferguson, a local scientist who has been following this crisis closely, to provide perspective. Dr. Ferguson, you've heard Judy's report. How do you interpret what's happening?
David, Judy, first let me say how profoundly troubling this account is. From the description of the wound, we are not dealing with anything that fits within known entomology or toxin behavior. Natural venoms generally cause pain, necrosis, or anaphylaxis. What Judy describes, concentric blistering, green fluid, spreading numbness without pain, suggests a compound that systematically disables the nervous system in stages. That's not defensive biology, that's a weaponized process. Equally alarming is the behavior. Insects, even social ones like bees or ants, do not coordinate with such tactical precision across species, destroying light sources, probing vents, timing their attack with larger ground entities. This implies not instinct but strategy. I cannot state with certainty what these organisms are, but I can say this: if they are part of the same ecosystem, we are observing a level of coordination unprecedented in the natural world. If they are not, then we are facing a system of interdependent predators introduced together for reasons I hesitate even to speculate on. Either way, the implications are catastrophic. This is not weather, this is not accident. And if containment fails, these organisms will not remain confined to Millfield. They will spread.
Dr. Ferguson, thank you for your candor, though I fear your words will bring little comfort to those listening. To our viewers, the evidence is clear. These entities are not deterred by light. They exploit weaknesses in human structures, and a single sting is fatal within hours. Do not underestimate them. Seal every possible opening. Prepare for long-term isolation. And understand that survival now depends on treating every encounter as deliberate and every sound outside as potentially hostile. We will remain on the air as long as our power holds, and we will continue to bring you what truth we can. This is David Weeks, Channel 7 News. Stay safe, stay inside, and do not open the door.
My beloved congregation, I speak to you now with a broken heart as I broadcast from the basement of our church while ungodly creatures prowl the streets above and the very air has grown thick with a darkness no human wisdom can explain. Revelation warns that in the last days the devil will come down with great wrath, and I tell you with certainty that what we see in these fog-covered regions is nothing less than demonic forces unleashed because this world has rejected God's law and His love. For decades, this nation has cast God out of schools, courts, and public squares, replacing His worship with idols of pleasure, wealth, and self. Now we reap what we have sown as creatures that should not exist walk among us, taking captive those who have no spiritual protection. Listen to the testimonies, people wrapped in cocoons, treated like livestock. This is exactly the kind of bondage Satan seeks for every soul that refuses to bow to Jesus Christ. Isaiah warned that those who seek after false spirits will be driven into darkness, and so it is today. Those who trust in science, government, or human wisdom alone are left defenseless before this evil. But God has not abandoned His people. Just as he spared Israel from Egypt's plagues, he is even now making a distinction between his children and the rebellious. I have seen with my own eyes these entities flee from the name of Jesus, from the power of his blood, and from the word spoken in faith. Therefore, saints, do not fear what man or demon can do to the body. Fear the one who holds both body and soul in his hands. These creatures are not the final enemy. They are instruments allowed to separate wheat from chaff, sheep from goats. Now is the time to repent, to cry out for lost souls, and to stand as witnesses of Christ's truth, no matter the cost, for the sufferings of this present time cannot compare with the glory awaiting those who overcome by the blood of the Lamb. The great tribulation has begun. The earth may shake, the stars may fall, and demons may walk among men, but our God still reigns. Hold fast to your faith, resist the devil, draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Greater is he who is in you than he who is in the world. Let us pray for protection, strength, wisdom, and boldness to proclaim the gospel in these final days, knowing that whosoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. Amen.
This is the emergency alert system. All residents in fog-affected areas are advised to remain indoors and avoid contact with any individuals who may have been exposed to fog conditions for extended periods. Federal emergency management agencies are coordinating response efforts, but evacuation operations have been suspended in areas where fog formations have persisted for more than 72 hours. Residents in these areas should prepare for extended isolation and document any observations of unusual phenomena for later analysis by appropriate authorities. Additional fog formations have been confirmed in 7 states, and the pattern appears to be expanding. All citizens are advised to monitor emergency broadcasts for updates and avoid travel to areas where unusual atmospheric conditions have been reported. This message will repeat every 30 minutes until normal broadcasting services can be restored. Do not approach fog zones. Do not trust the appearance of familiar individuals in affected areas. Document everything. Survive if you can.
This is David Weeks with Channel 7 News, broadcasting on backup power as our station remains surrounded and isolated. We've been trapped here for over a day, but we continue bringing you what reports we can. We're returning now to Judy Barton at the Martinez hardware store in Millfield, where dwindling supplies have forced survivors into a desperate situation. Judy, what's happening at your location?
David, our position has become critical. Margaret Foster has stretched our medical supplies as far as she can, but we've now run out of antibiotics entirely. Bill Rodriguez's hand wound is badly infected, and Margaret believes he could develop sepsis within hours. That's forced Tom Martinez into an impossible choice: remain inside and watch Bill die, or attempt a run to Miller's Pharmacy 2 blocks east. This morning, Tom organized what he called a fast strike mission. He, Bill, and Robert Walsh, who has some military experience, set out armed with improvised flamethrowers, flares, and radios. Mrs. Chen, who once worked at the pharmacy, gave them a floor plan so they could head straight for the medicine. The plan was to be in and out in under 30 minutes.
That sounds like an extremely high-risk operation given the presence of creatures in that area. What precautions did they take?
David, Tom refused to let our nurse go, but he prepared the team as best he could. Each man carried protective clothing, emergency flares, and radio beacons in case they were trapped. They left through the rear loading dock and used the back alleys to avoid Main Street, which we know is heavily patrolled by the larger entities. But even before reaching the pharmacy, they reported something none of us expected: large web-like structures spanning between buildings, glistening in the fog. Robert thought he saw objects suspended in them, shapes that looked disturbingly organic. They chose to press on, avoiding direct contact with the webs. 15 minutes later, their last clear transmission came through. They had entered the pharmacy and were searching for supplies. After that, only static and fragments.
Judy, can you describe what came through after contact began to fail?
David, it was Robert Walsh's voice breaking through the static. He repeated, "Don't come looking for us. Stay in the building. Tell them about the cocoons." His final words were chilling, that Tom and Bill were already gone, that he was trapped in the back room, and that people inside the pharmacy weren't dead but wrapped in webs, suspended in cocoons. He said some of them were still moving. His voice broke off after warning us that any building showing web formations is a death trap. Then the signal died completely.
That's a terrifying account, Judy. We're joined now by Harold Finch, a local ham radio operator who's been monitoring emergency frequencies since this began. Mr. Finch, what have you heard that might confirm these reports?
David, I've been listening on multiple bands. For the past 12 hours, I've picked up faint transmissions, distorted, full of interference, but enough to catch repeated words: webs, cocoons, and don't enter. It isn't just Millfield. I've intercepted similar distress calls from at least 2 neighboring towns. The pattern is the same. Supply teams go silent near pharmacies, schools, or municipal buildings, and the last thing anyone hears are frantic warnings about structures filled with people. What Judy just reported lines up with everything I've been hearing. These aren't isolated incidents. Whatever is weaving those structures is active across the region, and survivors are being harvested. My advice is simple: stay hidden, avoid any building with webbing, and assume that if you see those fibers, you're already inside hostile territory.
Mr. Finch, thank you. Judy, your report and Robert Walsh's final transmission have given us the clearest picture yet of what may be happening inside the fog. To our viewers, the evidence is now overwhelming that these creatures are not only killing, but capturing human beings alive, wrapping them in web-like material for purposes we can only imagine. Do not attempt rescue missions into areas marked by webs or cocoons. Treat those zones as fatal traps. This is David Weeks with Channel 7 News. We'll remain on the air as long as our power holds, but the window for survival is narrowing. Stay inside, stay together, and if you see the webs, do not approach.
This is the emergency alert system. All residents in fog-affected areas are advised to remain indoors and avoid contact with any individuals who may have been exposed to fog conditions for extended periods. Federal emergency management agencies are coordinating response efforts, but evacuation operations have been suspended in areas where fog formations have persisted for more than 72 hours. Residents in these areas should prepare for extended isolation and document any observations of unusual phenomena for later analysis by appropriate authorities. Additional fog formations have been confirmed in 7 states, and the pattern appears to be expanding. All citizens are advised to monitor emergency broadcasts for updates and avoid travel to areas where unusual atmospheric conditions have been reported. This message will repeat every 30 minutes until normal broadcasting services can be restored. Do not approach fog zones. Do not trust the appearance of familiar individuals in affected areas. Document everything. Survive if you can.
This is David Weeks with Channel 7 News, broadcasting from what remains of our emergency studio facility. Our building has sustained heavy damage and most of our field units are no longer responding, but we've maintained fragile communication with Judy Barton at the Martinez hardware store in Millfield. Survivors there are now facing what appears to be a coordinated final assault. Judy, we can just barely hear you through the static. What's your current status?
David, we're under siege. This isn't random anymore. It's a systematic, multi-pronged attack. It began at sunset with waves of flying creatures striking our windows and lights until most of our exterior floodlights were destroyed.
suppression and scouts, the tentacled ones attack doors and windows. A new form, taller than a man, with grotesquely jointed limbs, pressed its face to our glass as if trying to imitate human behavior. And Mrs. Chen saw something far larger moving past the loading dock, a hulking shape on many legs, clawing at the steel doors. Margaret believes it may be a command entity directing the others with those low-frequency tones we keep hearing. What's most chilling, David, is that those tones are no longer random, they're organized. We can hear them moving around the building, passing information, repositioning each other. It's tactical communication. These things aren't just predators, they're soldiers.
Judy, that suggests intelligence and coordination beyond anything we've considered. How is your group holding out under this kind of pressure?
David, our situation is grim. The creatures have severed our utilities, water, power, everything but the generators, and those will run dry within hours. Our barricades are splintering, and worst of all, they're attacking our morale. A short while ago, we began hearing human voices outside, calling our names, begging to be let in. Mrs. Davis swore it was her husband's voice, the man who vanished days ago. But when she looked through the window, she saw him surrounded by the creatures, moving with the same unnatural gait we've seen in altered victims. The creatures are using the voices of the captured as weapons, trying to lure us into opening the doors. We've had to establish absolute protocols. No one responds to voices, no matter who they sound like. It's brutal, but we know now that anyone taken by the mist is gone. Margaret Foster has been studying our notes, and she's realized something devastating. This entire week has been a test. The creatures escalate only after we adapt. When we built lighting, they unleashed the flyers. When we resisted their brute force, they began using human voices. Every defense we created was just another lesson for them to overcome. Margaret believes we've been part of an experiment. Our survival instincts have been teaching the creatures how to defeat human defenses. Tonight's assault feels like the end of that process. They've learned everything they needed.
That conclusion is chilling. To widen perspective, we're joined now by Lieutenant Mark Delaney of the National Guard, speaking through a brief unsecured channel before it went down. Lieutenant, what can you tell us about what your units have seen?
David, I don't have much time. Our perimeter teams have faced the same creatures Judy describes. Every time we deploy a tactic, lights, barriers, fire, they adapt within hours. They're learning faster than we can adjust. We've already lost 3 forward positions tonight. Tell your listeners these things aren't mindless. They're studying us. And once they finish here, they'll move outward. You need to assume Millfield isn't the end, it's the beginning.
Lieutenant, thank you. Judy, your courage and Margaret's documentation may be the only record of what's happening inside. For our viewers, what's unfolding in Millfield shows that these creatures are not random anomalies. They are intelligent, organized, and adaptive. Every defense teaches them more. We've just received unconfirmed reports of new fog formations across the tri-state region. If that is true, then what began here is already spreading. This is David Weeks with Channel 7 News. Stay inside, stay silent, and above all, do not underestimate them.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for gathering during these dark times. We are facing an unprecedented threat to our great nation. This fog, this unnatural phenomenon, has consumed entire regions of our country. Cities have gone silent. Families have been separated. And I want to be very clear with the American people. This is not just weather. This is something far more sinister, and frankly, it's probably the worst fog in the history of fog, maybe ever. Now, people ask me, Mr. President, what's your plan? And I tell them I've seen this before, not in person, obviously, but in the movies. Great movies, like when Roy Scheider said we're going to need a bigger boat in Jaws. Well, we've got the biggest boats, the best boats, but more importantly, we've got the courage to face this thing head on. Or like in Aliens, when that tough lady said they should nuke the site from orbit. Now, I'm not saying we're going to nuke anything, but we have options, many options, some of them very powerful. We have assembled the finest team of scientists, military advisors, and specialists this country has ever seen. The very best people. People who understand that when America is threatened, we don't run away. We stand and fight. like in Independence Day, when the president himself got in that fighter jet. Now, I'm not getting in a fighter jet. The Secret Service won't let me. Believe me, I've asked. But the spirit is the same. We lead from the front. The reports coming from the affected areas are deeply troubling. Creatures emerging from this fog that defy explanation. Families trapped in their homes and stores, wherever they can find safety. This is not the America we know and love. This is something out of a horror movie, but it's real, and it's happening to our people. But here's what I know about Americans. We don't give up. Remember what Harrison Ford said in Air Force One, "Get off my plane." Well, I'm saying to these creatures, get off my planet. Our military is mobilizing as we speak. We have technology these creatures have never seen. We have weapons they can't comprehend. And we have something they don't have, the American spirit. The same spirit that won 2 world wars, that put a man on the moon, that built the greatest civilization in human history. These things picked the wrong country to mess with. Some of the fake news media are spreading panic, saying the situation is hopeless. Wrong. So wrong. Yes, this is serious, probably the most serious threat we've ever faced, but America has never backed down from a challenge. Not once. Like Mel Gibson said in that movie about the Alamo, sometimes you have to remember what you're fighting for. We're fighting for our families, our communities, our way of life. To the American people still in the affected zones, hold on. Help is coming. Barricade your doors, stay together, and remember, you are not alone in this fight. Every resource of the federal government is being brought to bear on this crisis. We will not abandon you. We will not retreat. And we will not let these creatures turn our great nation into their hunting ground. This fog, these creatures, they underestimated us. They thought they could just roll in here and take over. But as we've learned from every great American movie, the monsters always lose in the end. Always. Because good triumphs over evil, light conquers darkness, and America never surrenders. Thank you, stay strong, and God bless the United States of America.
This is David Weeks with Channel 7 News. Our studio has been completely overrun. I'm broadcasting from a sealed maintenance room using emergency battery power that will fail within minutes. The creatures have breached our building and are systematically moving through every floor. I can hear them in the hallways outside this room, and I know they'll find me soon. But I'm maintaining this transmission because the public needs to know what we've learned about the true nature of this crisis. Judy Barton's final reports from Millfield have provided crucial information that changes everything we thought we understood about these entities. Judy, if you can still hear this, we lost your signal 20 minutes ago during what sounded like your final defensive stand at the hardware store. Your last transmission was cut off mid-sentence, but we received enough information to understand that the creatures had breached your position and were systematically eliminating the remaining survivors. Your documentation throughout this crisis has been invaluable, and if anyone survives to analyze these events, your reports will be essential for understanding what happened here. I'm now going to broadcast the final piece of evidence we've received about the nature of these creatures. Dr. John Ferguson, the atmospheric scientist who appeared on our earlier broadcasts, managed to reach our studio facility early this morning before the building was overrun. He brought with him data that he says proves these entities are not from our world, and that the fog is not a weather phenomenon but something far more sinister. I'm going to play his final recorded statement, which he made before he was taken by the creatures outside our building.
My name is Dr. John Ferguson, atmospheric scientist at Regional University. I'm recording this message on November 15th at approximately 6 a.m. from the Channel 7 News studio, where I've taken refuge after my laboratory was overrun by the entities within the fog. I need to correct the statements I made during my earlier television appearances. The fog is not a natural atmospheric phenomenon, and these creatures are not terrestrial in origin. Over the past 4 days, I've been analyzing samples of the fog itself using portable equipment I rescued from my laboratory, and the molecular composition is unlike anything that occurs naturally in Earth's atmosphere. The fog contains microscopic structures that appear to be artificially created, displaying organized patterns that suggest they're designed for a specific purpose rather than resulting from natural condensation processes. More significantly, I've detected electromagnetic signatures within the fog that correspond to theoretical models for interdimensional boundary disturbances. The fog isn't just providing cover for these creatures, it's creating a localized alteration in the fundamental physical properties of space that allows entities from another dimension to exist and operate in our reality. The creatures aren't invading our world in the conventional sense. They're temporarily converting sections of our reality into an environment where they can exist and function according to their own physical laws. The intelligence and coordination that survivors have documented makes perfect sense when you understand that these entities are conducting systematic exploration and mapping operations. They're not predators hunting randomly. They're interdimensional explorers studying our world's defensive capabilities and population distribution patterns. The fog formations that are now appearing across multiple states represent expansion of their reconnaissance operations, and the tactical intelligence they've gathered from communities like Millfield is being used to refine their methods for dealing with human resistance on a much larger scale. What's most terrifying is that the fog appears to be semi-permanent once established. My analysis suggests that areas that have been engulfed for more than 72 hours undergo molecular changes that make them more compatible with the creature's native dimensional environment. The longer the fog persists in any location, the more difficult it becomes for the creatures to be forced back to their original dimension, and the more dangerous it becomes for humans to survive in those altered areas. The implications for human civilization are catastrophic. If these entities continue expanding their fog zones and gathering intelligence about human defensive capabilities, they could eventually convert enough of our reality to support permanent colonization operations. We're not dealing with a natural disaster or even a conventional invasion. We're witnessing the initial stages of systematic dimensional colonization by entities with technological capabilities far beyond our current understanding. I'm transmitting all my research data to colleagues at universities outside the affected region, but I have little hope that conventional scientific or military responses will be effective against beings that can alter the fundamental physical properties of reality itself. The only advice I can provide is that humans should avoid areas where fog formations are reported, document everything they can about creature behavior, and prepare for the possibility that large sections of our world may become permanently uninhabitable by human life. The creatures have found my location. I can see their shadows moving outside the windows of this studio facility. If this recording survives, please understand that what happened here was not random. It was a carefully planned operation by entities with intelligence and capabilities that make human resistance extremely difficult. They're not going to stop with these initial fog zones. They're learning about us and they're preparing for something much larger. God help anyone who has to face what comes next.
That was Dr. Ferguson's final recorded statement before he was taken by the creatures early this morning. His analysis confirms what many of us have suspected, that we're dealing with something far beyond a natural phenomenon or conventional threat. I can hear the creatures outside this maintenance room now, testing the door with the same methodical patience that survivors have reported throughout this crisis. They know I'm in here, and they're not rushing to break in because they understand that I have nowhere to go. They can afford to be patient because they've already achieved their objectives in this region. For anyone who might be receiving this transmission, I want to provide a final summary of what we've learned about these entities and their operations. They are intelligent. They learn and adapt their tactics based on human responses. They can alter the physical properties of reality through the fog formations, and they appear to be conducting systematic reconnaissance for larger operations. The fog zones are not temporary weather anomalies. They are permanent dimensional alterations that make it possible for these creatures to exist and operate in our world. Once a fog zone has been established for more than 3 days, it may become permanently uninhabitable by humans. Communities within fog zones should not expect rescue or evacuation. They should focus on avoiding capture and documenting creature behavior for analysis by anyone who might survive to continue resistance efforts. Most importantly, the fog formations that are now appearing across multiple states represent expansion of these reconnaissance operations. Other communities will face the same systematic intelligence gathering operations that destroyed Millfield and our region. Learn from our mistakes. Do not establish static defensive positions that allow the creatures to study your capabilities. Do not trust the appearance or voices of familiar people who may have been altered. And do not assume that conventional survival strategies will be effective against entities that can adapt their tactics in real time. I want to thank our viewers for their loyalty throughout this crisis, and I want to thank Judy Barton for her extraordinary courage in documenting these events from inside the affected zone. Her reports have provided crucial information about creature behavior and capabilities that may help other communities prepare for similar encounters. I'm going to continue this broadcast until the equipment fails or the creatures reach me, because people need to understand what they're facing if these fog formations continue to expand. This is not a natural disaster that will pass. This is the beginning of something that could fundamentally alter human civilization. And the only hope for survival lies in understanding the true nature of these entities and their dimensional colonization operations. If this is the last voice you hear from Channel 7, remember what we've told you. Stay away from the fog. Do not believe the voices you hear inside it. And if you are still alive to listen, keep recording, keep resisting, and keep the truth alive. For Channel 7 News, this is David Weeks, signing off.
This is the emergency alert system. All residents in fog-affected areas are advised to remain indoors and avoid contact with any individuals who may have been exposed to fog conditions for extended periods. Federal emergency management agencies are coordinating response efforts, but evacuation operations have been suspended in areas where fog formations have persisted for more than 72 hours. Residents in these areas should prepare for extended isolation and document any observations of unusual phenomena for later analysis by appropriate authorities. Additional fog formations have been confirmed in 7 states, and the pattern appears to be expanding. All citizens are advised to monitor emergency broadcasts for updates and avoid travel to areas where unusual atmospheric conditions have been reported. This message will repeat every 30 minutes until normal broadcasting services can be restored. Do not approach fog zones. Do not trust the appearance of familiar individuals in affected areas. Document everything. Survive if you can.